joining me today is Hamish Brown. Now, Hamish was the circuit manager, the managing director of Silverstone back in the 80s, but he's also the son of Jimmy Brown, who was the man right on the ground for the very first race in 1948. Of course, 1948 was the first Grand Prix. That was on a longer track. But 1950 was a very special year and a big year for him because it was the first official British Grand Prix, which was the first ever round of the World Championship. And one of it was having enough straw bales, I think, to mark out the lines of the circuit.
Well, but also it changed because in 1948, looking at the pictures and everything, they used the main runways. And after 1948, my father came up with some ideas, along with a guy by the name of Smith Churchill, who used to be the war rag manager on site. And he was a motor racing person. He used to do grass track racing and speedboat racing. And they had a good look around and then spoke to some of the BRDC members and drivers and everything, and came up with the actual using the taxiing roads and taxiing routes, which form sort of the ring around all the airfields. And that's how the 1950 shape of the Grand Prix came about.
Of course, the big thing was that the King came.
Yes.
King what was there as the number one VIP guest, of course. Did your father recall meeting him, or was he involved with him being there?
Yep, it was the King and Queen, and also I think Princess Elizabeth. Now, Queen Elizabeth was there as well. He briefly met them because obviously they were lined up with all the dignitaries and everything. But one of the funny stories I remember him telling me was that when they were setting it all up, of course, one of the main things was to have a royal privy. And so obviously they set up the royal privy, and they had to stand guards on this royal privy because in those days there weren't very many toilets around the place and latrines and everything. So to ensure that it wasn't swamped and everything, it was well guarded, I understand.
We saw some minutes of a 1950 planning meeting for the British Grand Prix come out of the archive, and they were anticipating over 100,000 people for the British Grand Prix that day. It must have been a logistical nightmare for your father, and what was, as you said, a relatively small band of people helping him.
Yeah, I believe it was around 140,000 turned up, and from Buckingham to Silverstone, Brackley to Silverstone, and Toaster to Silverstone, the roads were chock-a-block. It was virtually trying to turn it into a one-way system, but even if you turn it into a one-way system, you still need access to get out of the circuit in case of emergency. And so that, he always said it was a logistical nightmare. They managed, I think, to get the majority of the crowd in before the start of the Grand Prix. But then after the Grand Prix, well, as you can imagine, police and stewards and marshals had been on duty for a long time. So after the Grand Prix, everybody sort of breathed a sigh of relief. But it was chaos getting back out. People were taking all sorts of routes across local farmers' fields, driving through, taking fences down. There wasn't a route at that time from Silverstone across to Whitterbury or Livingston Darrell. But mind you, Robarts, who owned the land to the east of Silverstone, God, they had traffic jams going across their fields. I seem to remember my father telling me.
You mentioned your mother a couple of times. Her role was really very important. She was very involved, wasn't she?
She was extremely involved because, at an event, she'd be there making sure that, as the paper pickers and the staff came in, that they got all the equipment, knew where to go. Then also she would be going over to the center of the circuit. If there was a queue of drivers signing on and everything, she would ensure she got in there, mucked in, and helped to make sure the drivers all got signed on satisfactorily. She'd also go into the switchboard, in brackets, what we would term as race control nowadays, make sure that everything was working okay, fine going on there. And then because of during the war period, she also was a first aider. she used to go into the medical centre, and there was a lovely old lady in there called, I think, Peggy Busby. And she used to go and see Peggy, make sure that, you know, were the doctors happy? Had they, you know, got everything they needed? So generally, although my father was out on front line dealing with, you know, the masses of crowds coming in, my mother was very much the person who went behind the scenes to ensure that, you know, from her point of view and my father's point of view, things were running nice and calmly and, you know, being prepared for the events to start. You know, you'd have people wandering around the paddock when you had 40-gallon drums of fuel, smoking, pipes, cigars, cigarettes, dumping them out. And he said, and so, you know, you would try and get to lots of fire equipment close by and have the poor local fireman pulling his hair out, trying to keep, you know, smokers away from the area.
Hamish, some fantastic memories of those days, and of your father and your mother, Kay, of course. It's been great talking to you, and
you, Andrew.
meeting up again in the future.